My name is Cora, and I'm 26. I arrange things: peonies into bouquets, eucalyptus stems into vases, a new life for myself out of the scattered pieces of an old one. I live just outside of Portland, in a small town where the persistent drizzle feels more like a companion than weather. My flower shop is my sanctuary, a small space nestled in a quiet strip mall between a tech repair place and a laundromat that always smells of warm cotton. I've been open for 6 months. After my engagement ended, I swore off anything that felt like it might need saving, especially men. I crave the predictability of my days. I like the simple rhythm of unlocking the door, the scent of damp earth and fresh-cut stems. But I'm learning that life rarely respects a well-laid plan. It began on a Wednesday afternoon. I was wrestling a massive shipment of ceramic pots from my car when I saw him struggling to get a bulky, ancient-looking server rack through the door of the repair shop next to mine. He had it angled just wrong, and the metal frame was scraping against the door jamb with a screech that set my teeth on edge. I set down my own box and walked over. "Need a hand with that?" I asked. He looked up, startled. He had kind eyes, tired but focused, and a smudge of something gray on his cheek. "I've got it," he said, his voice a little strained from the effort. "Famous last words," I replied, stepping forward to hold the door open wider. He finally managed to maneuver it inside. He straightened up, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Thanks," he said, offering a small, grateful smile. "It's heavier than it looks." "No problem," I said, giving a little shrug. "We're neighbors. It's what we do." I didn't give it a second thought, but the next morning he caught my eye as I was unloading a bucket of tulips and gave me a nod. "You sell flowers, right?" he called out. "On a good day," I answered. "On a bad day, I just talk to them until they look less sad." He actually laughed, a low, genuine sound. "I'm Elias." That was how it started. In the days that followed, I'd see him through my front window, hunched over a laptop with intense focus, talking patiently to a frantic customer on the phone, or just staring into the guts of some machine with a look of quiet determination. We kept our interactions small, limited to brief greetings across the pavement, the kind of casual hellos you offer up in the hope that one might stick and grow into something more, even when you've told yourself you don't want it to. A few days later, I found myself standing behind him at the local coffee stand. He'd just ordered when he started patting his pockets with a look of dawning panic. "Forgot my wallet," he muttered, looking embarrassed. Before he could cancel the order, I stepped up. "I've got it," I said. "You're the new guy on the block. Consider it a welcome gift." He looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Welcome to the neighborhood." A black coffee. He didn't protest further. By the second week, we had settled into an unspoken routine. Fragmented conversations during brief moments of downtime, shared nods across the parking lot, and the occasional silent, knowing glance when a particularly difficult customer was causing a scene. He was the new guy on the block. Consider it a welcome gift. He looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Welcome to the neighborhood." A black coffee. He didn't protest further. By the second week, we had settled into an unspoken routine. It wasn't anything official, just these small, shared moments that made the long, quiet days feel a little less solitary. He brought a sense of calm to the block that I hadn't realized was missing. One afternoon, I was outside arranging a display of small succulents on a tiered shelf. The sun had finally broken through the perpetual gray clouds, a rare gift in this part of Oregon. I had soil under my fingernails and a stray leaf in my hair, feeling more like myself than I had in months. I saw Elias walk by, and he paused. "If we lived on the same street, I think I'd accidentally fall in love with you," he said. The line was delivered with a light, joking tone, the kind people use as a shield. But I looked up from my work, met his eyes, and offered a small, tired smile. "Then it's a good thing we're just business neighbors," I replied. I said it without any coyness or flirtation, just a simple statement of fact. It felt like an honest response to a line that was probably not meant to be taken seriously, but my life had become too complicated for games. And perhaps I was just weary of pretending that comments like that didn't carry a small, hopeful weight. That evening, I thought about what he'd said. It was meant to be a simple icebreaker, a way to make me smile, but a tiny part of it had felt real, and that was the part I didn't know how to handle. I saw him again the next morning. He was sitting on the curb behind his shop, drinking from a steaming mug, his shoulders hunched against the morning chill. He was staring off into the distance, looking lost in thought. I stood for a moment, holding a tray of seedlings, debating whether I should interrupt his solitude or just walk by. I decided to walk past, offering a quiet, "Morning." He looked up, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "Hey," he said. I hesitated, and then something made me stop. "Want half a scone?" I asked, gesturing to the paper bag in my hand. It was the most forward I'd been. He paused. "That might be the kindest offer I've gotten all year." I broke off a piece and held it out to him. "Don't say I never gave you anything." We sat in a comfortable silence for a few moments, just eating, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and a bird chirping from a nearby tree. Finally, he broke the quiet. "You okay?" he asked gently. I didn't look at him. I kept my gaze fixed on the cracked asphalt. "Today's the anniversary," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. I let him wait for the explanation. A year ago today, I was supposed to be getting married. I could feel his eyes on me, but I continued to stare straight ahead. He left a few weeks before. No big drama, no other woman. He just woke up one day and said the feeling was gone. A heavy silence settled between us. "Sorry," I added quickly, feeling a flush of embarrassment. That's a lot to dump on someone during a scone sharing. I finally looked at him. He just shook his head slowly. "No, it's okay." I continued to stare straight ahead. He left a few weeks before. No big drama, no other woman. He just woke up one day and said the feeling was gone. A heavy silence settled between us. "Sorry," I added quickly, feeling a flush of embarrassment. That's a lot to dump on someone during a scone sharing. He just shook his head slowly. "No, you're good." He didn't say it then, but I could see in his eyes that he understood that specific kind of emptiness, the dizzying moment when the person who was your entire future becomes a memory from a past you didn't choose. We didn't say much else that morning. He eventually stood up to head back to his shop. "If you ever need anything fixed that isn't a plant," he said, "I'm decent with coffee makers, stubborn TV remotes, and minor emotional breakdowns. Light repairs only." I felt a real smile spread across my face then, one that actually reached my eyes. The days that followed settled into a new kind of quiet understanding. We didn't exchange numbers, we didn't make plans to see each other, but whenever our paths crossed in the parking lot or at the coffee stand, there was a pause, a shared look, a word or two. It was never much, but it was enough. One evening, I stayed late to finish a large order for a wedding. My shop was dimly lit, and I was surrounded by buckets of baby's breath and white roses. I heard a soft knock on the glass door. It was Elias, holding a takeout container. "I ordered way too much Thai food," he said simply. I looked from the container to his face. That sounds like a very flimsy excuse to come say hi. Very flimsy. I smiled and gestured for him to come in. I cleared off a small workspace, and we ate in a comfortable quiet, surrounded by the scent of flowers and the silent, broken electronics on his side of the wall. I asked if he was from the area. "No," he said. "Grew up in California, moved up to Oregon about 6 years ago with my ex-wife. I stayed because leaving felt like running away, and I was tired of running." He added, "Plus, I've grown to like the rain." "You might be the only one," I said with a small laugh. He smiled. "Are you a local?" "Born and raised about 20 minutes from here. Moving to this town was my grand act of rebellion." We both chuckled, and then he asked, "So, what's your story?" I pushed a stray noodle around my container. Married young, divorced 2 years ago. It was quiet. We just stopped being on the same team. He nodded, a deep understanding in his eyes that didn't require any further explanation. I used to believe that if something was broken, you just needed to try harder to fix it, I said, more to myself than to him. But I'm learning that sometimes things break because they're not meant to hold together. There was a moment of silence, and then I felt the need to clarify. I'm not really looking for anything right now, just so you know. Same, he said, meeting my gaze. But I'm not completely against the idea of something either. Same, I repeated, my voice softer this time. He left soon after that. I stood in the doorway of my shop and watched him walk across the dark, glistening parking lot, his silhouette framed by the streetlights. The quiet sound of his footsteps on the wet pavement echoed in my mind long after he was gone. That weekend, I found myself glancing out my shop window every time I heard a car pull into the lot. I hated myself for it. I wasn't that person, the one who waits around for a man she barely knows. But there was something about Elias that felt grounding in a way I couldn't articulate. I didn't see him again until Sunday afternoon. I was outside, trying to tape a sale sign to my front window, and the wind kept catching it. He came out of his shop and offered to hold it steady for me. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know," he replied. "Just wanted to help." After a moment, I asked, "Do you make a habit of helping all the new business owners with their signage?" "Only the ones who share their scones and their life stories before 9 a.m. He grinned, and I laughed. For a brief second, the way he looked at me made me feel like I wasn't just the woman from the flower shop next door, but someone he saw as solid and real. After we got the sign up, we stood there for a moment in a strange, pregnant silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was full of unspoken things, a sense that the ground beneath us was subtly shifting. He turned to me and asked, "Do you ever feel like you're deliberately keeping your distance from something good just because you're afraid of what it might lead to?" I looked directly at him, my heart giving a small jolt. I didn't say anything. I just gave a small, slow nod, offered a faint smile, and went back inside my shop. I leaned against the door for a full minute, my hands in the pockets of my apron, thinking, maybe some people don't enter your life like a lightning strike. Maybe some just quietly take a seat nearby and wait patiently for you to finally notice they were there the whole time. It was a Thursday in late September, one of those days caught between the lingering warmth of summer and the crisp bite of autumn, the kind of day that makes you want to find any excuse to stay outside. Elias and I had reached an unspoken agreement to maintain our comfortable distance. We didn't text, we didn't make plans. We just seemed to exist in the same orbit, crossing paths more frequently than mere chance would suggest. That week, Maya, the barista from the coffee stand we both frequented, had guilt-tripped us into volunteering for a community donation drive. It involved sorting through mountains of donated goods in a cavernous warehouse. We both agreed because it felt simpler than trying to explain why we wouldn't. And so, there we were, standing under the hum of fluorescent lights, folding endless pairs of jeans and trying not to wonder about their history. Maya had roped us into helping with a charity event. It was mostly sorting donations, stacking boxes, and folding clothes. We both said yes because it seemed easier than manufacturing an excuse to say no. That's how we ended up in a warehouse on the outskirts of town, with industrial lights buzzing overhead, making piles of denim and quietly judging the fashion choices of strangers. Elias was working across a long folding table from me. His hair was a little messy, his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, and he had a focused, serious expression as he worked. He looked peaceful. It seemed like keeping his hands busy was his way of quieting his mind. We didn't talk much at first, just exchanged logistical comments. How many more boxes we had to get through, whether we thought we'd ever earn a coffee break, and the strange nostalgia of seeing so many clothes from the early 2000s. At one point, someone from another table passed me a dated, slightly yellowed wedding dress. I held it up by the shoulders, a wry smirk on my face. "Well, I guess this one didn't take," I said. He looked up and let out a short laugh. "Someone's happily ever after just got donated to charity." We went back to folding. Someone put on a classic rock station, the volume low and unobtrusive. Fleetwood Mac's Landslide started to play, a song that always managed to find the bruised parts of my heart. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd of volunteers started to thin out. People finished their shifts, took phone calls, or wandered off in search of snacks. Before I knew it, it was just the two of us at the table, folding a pile of winter coats, standing nearly shoulder to shoulder, as if we'd been doing this together for years. I leaned back against the table, stretching my aching back with a quiet sigh. "I am officially sick of other people's cast-offs," I declared. "That was quick," he replied with a slight smile. "You held out longer than I did." He looked at me, a slow, warm smile spreading across his face. I'm not sure what it was. The dim lighting, the unexpected quiet, the way a loose strand of hair fell across his forehead, but he said it. "Imagine the two of us together," he joked. "It would be a total catastrophe." He said it with that same lightness he always used, as if the joke was a smokescreen for the part of him that was genuinely curious. But this time, I didn't laugh. I didn't look away. I just stood there, looking right back at him. I tilted my head slightly, and a sad, knowing smile touched my lips. In a voice that was barely more than a whisper, I said, "I do. A lot." Then, before the weight of my words could settle in the space between us, I turned, picked up a heavy box of coats, and walked toward the storage area at the back of the warehouse. There was no dramatic pause, no meaningful last glance. I just said something true and then walked away before he had the chance to say something that might break the spell. I left him standing there, holding a half-folded jacket, his arms frozen in midair. I picked up a box of coats and walked toward the back of the warehouse. No pause, no dramatic music, no lingering glance, just a woman saying something real and walking away before I had a chance to ruin it with more words. I could feel his eyes on my back, and I imagined him standing there like an idiot, still holding a half-folded jacket, his arms frozen, his brain trying to catch up to what his ears just heard. "I do. A lot." I replayed it in my own head, the soft tone, the unplanned timing, the way I didn't wait for his reaction. I hadn't been asking for anything in return. I had just been releasing a truth that had been building inside me for weeks. We didn't speak for the rest of the shift. We found tasks in opposite corners of the large room, offering polite, distant smiles if our paths happened to cross. We avoided each other just enough that it could almost seem accidental. When the event finally wound down, I grabbed my keys, gave Maya a quick hug, and offered Elias a small wave from across the empty parking lot. No more words were necessary. He gave me a look that I couldn't quite decipher, a look that seemed to say he wanted to speak, but was terrified he'd already heard too much. I drove home with the radio off, the silence in my car filled with the echo of my own voice. I do. A lot. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the shadows on my ceiling, analyzing every single conversation we had ever had, every small smile, every shared silence, and I wondered how I had been so blind. Blind to what? To the fact that I wasn't just folding jeans next to a quiet man with a kind face. I was slowly, irrevocably falling for someone who had seen the real me long before I was ready to show it to anyone. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the thought didn't fill me with dread. It just made me ache with the desire to see him again. But what could I possibly say now? How do you follow up after you've essentially told someone you've been imagining a life with them? And the more terrifying question was, what if he wanted that life too? The next morning, I arrived at my shop 20 minutes late, my mind a fog of exhaustion and anxiety. I hadn't slept. I kept hearing my own words, "I do a lot," and cringing at how they must have sounded, slipping out without my consent. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just a fleeting moment. People say strange things when they're tired, standing in a poorly lit warehouse surrounded by other people's memories. That's all it was. It had to be. Yet I couldn't stop myself from peeking through the blinds toward his shop. He usually arrived earlier than I did, but his space was dark. I kept looking, waiting. He didn't arrive until well after 11. I saw his old truck pull into its usual spot, and I immediately spun away from the window, my heart hammering as if I'd been caught spying. It was pathetic. I was 26, not 16. The little bell above my door chimed at around 11:15. I looked up from the bouquet I was arranging, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't a customer. It was Elias. He was holding a small white box, the kind that holds a single pastry. He walked inside as if he belonged there, though he'd never stepped foot in my shop before. "A peace offering," he said, his voice quiet. "Or maybe an apology. Whichever you think fits the situation better." A small smile touched my lips. "An apology for what?" "For saying something strange yesterday," I mumbled, not meeting his eyes. "I wasn't planning to, I don't know, say that." He gestured toward the counter. "Can I sit for a minute?" I nodded and led him to the tall stool I kept behind the counter, a spot usually reserved for me during my lunch breaks. He sat down, placing the box carefully on the counter between us, his gaze fixed on it. "I'm not entirely sure what that moment was about," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I was just exhausted, or maybe I actually meant it. Whatever it was, I'm sure it was unexpected." He leaned against the wall opposite me, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. "Yeah," he said, his voice calm. "It was, but not in a bad way." His words made me finally look up and meet his eyes. "It just got me thinking," he continued, "about, well." He seemed to be choosing his words carefully, as if he didn't want to sound like he'd been up all night thinking about it, even though I suspected he had. "About how we started talking," he said. "And how strange it is. I don't know your favorite color, or where you went to college, but I know that the pitch of your voice gets softer when you're helping an elderly customer choose flowers. I know you tap your pen twice on the counter when you're concentrating on an arrangement, and I know that you never take the last sip of your coffee." A slow, shy smile spread across my face. "You're very observant." A comfortable silence fell between us. Not awkward, but filled with a new kind of significance. He pushed the box toward me. Inside was a perfect slice of lemon cake. "This is my peace offering," he said, "because if we're going to start admitting things we didn't intend to admit, we might as well do it with sugar." A laugh escaped me, more from relief than anything else. I found a fork, broke off a small piece, and ate it. "Do you ever do that?" he asked softly. "Say something completely honest and then instantly wish you could take it back?" "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "But sometimes, I think those are the only words that truly matter." He nodded as if he had known that all along, but just needed to hear someone else say it. We sat there for another 20 minutes, sharing the slice of cake and speaking very little. Just being in the same small space felt like a conversation in itself. Before he left, he paused at the door. "I don't want things to get weird between us," I said, the words rushing out. "Me neither," he replied. "And I don't think they are. I think they're just changing." I liked the way he said that. I could feel it. I stepped outside onto the pavement, then turned back to him. "You're the one who fixes things, right?" He raised an eyebrow. "That's the general idea." I held up a small, dented vintage film camera, the kind my father had given me when I was a teenager. I dropped this last night. The lens is stuck. Do you think you could fix it? He took it from my hands, turning it over to inspect the damage. One of the dials was missing. I can certainly try, he said. No guarantees. Good, I replied with a small smile, because I'm not sure I'm ready for guarantees anyway. He left after that. No hug, no dramatic farewell, just the sight of him walking back to his shop, leaving me with my broken camera and a dozen more questions than I had started the day with. That night, I sat at my workbench long after I'd locked up, cleaning thorns off rose stems. I wasn't sure why I cared so much about him fixing that camera, but I suspected it wasn't really about the camera at all. It was about trusting someone with something broken, watching them patiently and carefully put it back together. It was about something slow, something deliberate, something that couldn't be rushed. I thought about the tiny missing dial and realized maybe that's how this was supposed to happen between us. Not in a sudden flash, but one small, essential piece at a time. A week went by. Elias didn't call about the camera. I knew he could have fixed it in a day, maybe two. But something told me he was taking his time. Not because the repair was difficult, but because the broken camera was a bridge between us, an excuse to let the space between us settle. I didn't text him. I didn't stop by his shop, but I didn't need to. I saw him nearly every day through my front window, watering the planters outside his door, talking with customers, laughing at something on his phone. The only thing that had changed was the way our eyes met across the parking lot. We weren't strangers anymore, not even just friends. We were two people who had said something that could not be unsaid. On Friday, just as I was about to close, I saw him walking toward my shop, a small paper bag in his hand. I looked up the moment he stepped inside, and a wave of relief washed over me, as if I'd been holding my breath all week. "Hi," he said. "Hi." He handed me the bag. I opened it and pulled out the camera. It looked whole again. "You fixed it," I said, my voice soft with awe. "I did," he said. "The lens moves, the shutter works. You'll have to track down some 35mm film, but it's working." I turned it over and over in my hands, almost afraid to touch it, as if my carelessness might break it again. "Thank you," I whispered. A long, significant pause hung in the air. I finally looked up at him, my gaze steady. "So, what happens now?" I asked, my voice stronger than I expected. "Do we just go back to folding clothes in warehouses and pretending we don't think about each other?" He didn't respond immediately, and I could see him processing my question, a question I knew he had been thinking about too. "No," he finally said. "I don't want to go back to pretending." His eyes were clear and direct. He stood perfectly still. "I don't either," I confessed. The tension that had been building for weeks seemed to dissolve, as if a great weight had been lifted from the room. I stepped out from behind the counter to stand in front of him. "You should know, I'm not looking for some big romance," I said, needing to be clear. "I'm not in my early 20s anymore. I don't want fireworks. I just need something real, something quiet, something steady." He nodded slowly. "I'm not trying to rush anything," he said. "I just want to be in the same space as you, whatever that ends up looking like." A genuine smile bloomed on my face, the kind of smile that comes when you hear something you've been desperately hoping to hear but didn't know how to ask for. I glanced down at the repaired camera in my hands, then back up at him. "Still imagining us together?" I asked, my voice gentle. He smiled back. "No," he said. "Now I'm just living it." I didn't say anything else. I simply stepped forward and wrapped my arms around his neck, and it felt like the most natural, instinctual thing I had ever done. I felt him hold me back, a solid, complete embrace, and for the first time, I let myself be held without reservation, without a joke to deflect the intimacy, without waiting for the other shoe to drop. I simply stepped forward and wrapped my arms around his neck, and it felt like the most natural, instinctual thing I had ever done. I felt him hold me back, a solid, complete embrace, and for the first time, I let myself be held without reservation, without a joke to deflect the intimacy, without waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the first time in so long, nothing felt precarious. Nothing felt like it needed to be guarded by layers of sarcasm or polite distance. It just was. We spent the rest of that evening walking through the quiet streets of our small town, with no destination in mind, just talking. We were really talking for the first time, without any filters, sharing stories about our pasts, our fears, and the quiet hopes we held for the future. Then, with no fanfare or hesitation, he turned to me and said, "Do you want to come over tomorrow?" Just to be. There were no hidden expectations in his voice. I said yes. The next day bled into the next week, which then turned into the next month. Our story didn't unfold with explosions or dramatic declarations. It was built in quiet moments, shared breakfasts on my small patio, late-night movies on his comfortable couch, long walks around the neighborhood. I would bring him leftover flowers that were too beautiful to throw away, and he would show up at my door with some small gadget he'd fixed for me that I hadn't even known was broken. We never put a label on what we were becoming. We didn't feel the need to rush it. We both knew exactly what it was. 3 months later, he kissed me right in the middle of his shop while he was in the process of fixing a vintage radio. I pulled back, smiled, and said, "Just so you know, I'm not going anywhere." And he replied, "Good." I hadn't needed to imagine us together for a long time. So that's how it ended, or more accurately, how it finally began. No grand gestures, no tearful goodbyes, no unexpected twists. Just two people who finally stopped hiding inside their own broken stories long enough to build a new one, together. No more jokes, no more waiting. Just him and me, right where we were always meant to be.